Russia was supposed to be winning. That's what Moscow kept saying. That's what maps seemed to show. That's what some Western governments, including, at one point, the United States, appeared to accept as reality. But in April 2026, something happened that Moscow's entire strategic narrative was not built to survive. Ukraine took back more ground than Russia captured, net, for the month, for the first time since August 2024. And the soldiers actually fighting this war? They felt it before the analysts confirmed it. This is Ukraine, May 2026, 4 years and 3 months into a full-scale war that Vladimir Putin promised would be decided quickly. The front line stretches for hundreds of kilometers across the east and south of the country. Towns have been reduced to rubble, cities have been evacuated and re-evacuated. And through all of it, Russia has maintained one constant public claim, that it is advancing. Slowly, yes. Brutally, yes. But always forward. That claim just hit a wall. According to analysis from the Institute for the Study of War, a US-based conflict monitoring organization that tracks daily territorial changes, last month, Ukraine reclaimed more land than Russia managed to seize. It's a small amount in absolute terms. Russia still occupies close to 20% of Ukrainian territory. But in a war where fractions of kilometers can take weeks and thousands of lives, this shift is not a footnote. It's a signal. If you want clear, fact-based coverage of this story as it develops, subscribe now. This situation is moving fast, and we're tracking every development. Let's go back to the ground level, because that's where this story actually lives. Officer Kirill Bondarenko has spent more than 4 years on Ukrainian front lines. He serves in the Ukrainian Unmanned Aerial Systems Unit known as Lazar's Group, and he is currently fighting near Zaporizhzhia. He told CNN, quote, "We can see and feel how the mood among the Russian troops on the front line is changing. They are exhausted." That's not a politician speaking. That's not an analyst in Washington reading satellite imagery. That is a man with a drone controller in his hand, watching Russian soldiers across a contested field in southern Ukraine. He added, "We have managed to turn the tide." Now, what does that actually look like in practice? Ukraine's defense minister Mykhailo Fedorov said that the past few months were record-breaking in terms of battlefield success. He stated that Ukraine eliminated 35,000 Russian troops in both March and April, and that Russia now lacks the forces to continue offensive operations at the pace it previously maintained. Western governments appear to corroborate part of that picture. Officials in Western capitals, citing intelligence data, have put Russian casualty rates at approximately 30,000 to 35,000 per month. Let that number settle for a moment. 30,000 to 35,000 casualties every month. And then there's the wider count. Last week, Russian opposition outlets Mediazona and Meduza published a new estimate of total Russian losses since the full-scale invasion began in February 2022, stating that as many as 352,000 Russian soldiers may have been killed. The Kremlin did not comment on that figure. For context, Ukraine's losses, while also severe, are estimated by most international analysts at between 100,000 and 150,000 fatalities. CNN cannot independently verify either figure. Neither side publishes official numbers. Here's where the story gets complicated, and where the battlefield picture becomes more than just a question of territory. The city of Pokrovsk, once a strategically critical Ukrainian transport hub, was finally captured by Russian forces in December, nearly 2 full years after Moscow's first attempt to take it. When it fell, there was genuine fear in Kyiv that this would open a path for further Russian advances deeper into Ukrainian-controlled territory. It didn't happen. Russian troops in and around Pokrovsk have been effectively stuck, unable to push ahead. Analysts say Russian forces have resorted to infiltrating no man's land, raising flags in contested zones to create the appearance of advances, but they cannot hold those positions. Bondarenko described it directly. The Russians constantly report to their commanders that they have captured various villages, but in reality, they are not there. We are constantly pushing them out. A military force reporting false victories to its own command structure, that is not a sign of confidence. That is a sign of a system under pressure from the inside. And the reason Russian logistics have degraded to this point, it has a specific name. Ukraine found Russia's weak spot, and it's not on the front line. It's several hundred kilometers behind it. And Ukraine has been striking it relentlessly. For most of this war, the dominant image of Ukrainian drone warfare has been two things: short-range strikes against Russian positions along the contact line, and long-range attacks reaching deep into Russian territory. Oil facilities, military infrastructure, sometimes cities. But something shifted in recent months. Ukraine added a third layer: mid-range drone strikes targeting Russian logistics. Depots, command posts, air defense systems, supply routes have increased dramatically, according to ISW analyst Christina Harward. She told CNN, "We've seen a really dramatic uptick in the number of these strikes. It's affecting Russian logistics. If they're constantly now under threat of Ukrainian drone strikes, that's going to significantly threaten, slow, and hamper their logistics." Think about what logistics actually means in a land war. It means ammunition. It means fuel. It means food. It means replacement troops being moved to the front. It means wounded soldiers being moved out. It means the communication networks that tell a battalion commander what is happening 2 kilometers ahead. When that system starts breaking down, when truck convoys can't move without drone coverage, when depots are getting hit, when commanders can't get accurate supply estimates, the entire military machine slows. Not just at the front, everywhere. Zelensky confirmed in one of his nightly addresses that mid-range strikes against Russian military logistics had become the country's top priority, and that Ukraine was expanding contracts and production to sustain that effort at scale. The frontline confirmation came from a senior Ukrainian security service officer, callsign Bankir, fighting in the Zaporizhzhia direction. He told CNN that despite continuous Russian assault pressure, Ukraine had managed to reclaim partial control over areas Russia had seized months earlier. He credited coordinated action between infantry and drone units operating continuously against Russian forces. Now here is where this gets geopolitically significant, and where it connects to something much larger than the battlefield. ISW analyst Christina Harward told CNN that Putin's entire negotiating posture toward the West has been built on a form of cognitive warfare, convincing Western governments that supporting Ukraine is pointless because Russia's victory is simply a matter of time. She said, "This is really poking holes in that entire narrative. That matters because of what happens in Washington." At various points, US President Donald Trump appeared to accept the Russian frame, declaring Russia to be winning the war, and famously telling Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky during a tense meeting that he did not have the cards. If Ukraine's battlefield momentum continues, if the numbers hold, that narrative loses its grip. And a narrative losing its grip in Washington has direct consequences for what kind of support Ukraine receives, what kind of pressure is placed on Moscow at the negotiating table, and how long this war actually continues. Do you think this shift changes how Western governments handle the Ukraine question? Or is it too small, too fragile to move the needle? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. But underneath all the strategic analysis, underneath the maps and the drone strike data and the casualty estimates, there is another layer to this story. One that doesn't get tracked in percentage points of reclaimed territory. Here is the part of this story that rarely makes it onto the front pages. While Ukraine is scoring tactical wins in the east, Russia quietly moved to disable Telegram, the encrypted messaging application used extensively by soldiers on both sides for frontline military communication. This came shortly after Ukraine persuaded Elon Musk's SpaceX to deny Russia access to its Starlink satellite internet service. Even Russia's most ardent pro-war military bloggers openly criticized the Telegram decision. A government at war, cutting off one of its military's primary communication tools. At the same moment, its troops are allegedly filing false battlefield reports to their own commanders. That is not a military winning with confidence. That is a military managing information on multiple fronts at once, including information about itself. Zoom out from the strategic map for a moment. Put down the territorial percentage figures. There are real people inside this story, and their experience of this war does not fit neatly into any narrative of momentum or reversal. Dmytro is a drone operator in Ukraine's 79th Brigade. He agreed to speak to CNN using only his first name. He has watched this war from the inside, from the cockpit of a remote aircraft, guiding strikes, watching targets, living with whatever follows. He described the day-to-day experience on the front line as an emotional roller coaster. Morale rises whenever Kyiv achieves a tactical success, a village recaptured, a supply depot destroyed, a unit forced to retreat. But in the same breath, he said those fighting on the front are constantly worried about the people they left behind at home. Because the war is not only happening at the front. Russia significantly intensified its missile and drone attacks against cities across Ukraine throughout last year, targeting energy facilities and civilian infrastructure. The United Nations documented more than 2,500 Ukrainian civilian deaths in 2025, making it the deadliest year for non-combatants since the initial invasion. And the first 4 months of 2026 have been even worse, with civilian deaths outpacing the same months last year, according to UN data. Those numbers represent apartments hit in the night, hospitals evacuated, power grids failing in winter, children moved into basements for the third winter in a row, and the pace has not slowed. In the 24 hours leading up to Thursday morning alone, Russia launched more than 1,400 drones and 56 missiles. In Kyiv, air raid sirens were active for approximately 11 consecutive hours. 11 hours. Imagine living in a city where the alarm does not stop for half a day, where you no longer flinch at the sound, not because you feel safe, but because flinching has stopped being useful. Dmytro spoke about what it feels like when Ukrainian strikes reach inside Russian territory, when the war stops being something that only Ukrainians experience. When we hit Russian cities with their buildings and plants, he told CNN, Russian people acknowledge there is war. And later that day, we get hit terribly in multiple places, with many casualties. It's just an endless war mess. An endless war mess. That phrase carries more honest weight than most official statements from either capital. On the Russian side, the human cost is equally staggering, though the Russian government does not acknowledge it. Opposition outlets estimate up to 352,000 Russian soldiers killed since 2022. That figure comes from journalists operating largely outside Russia, compiling open-source data, death notices, and regional reports. The methodology is painstaking. The number, if even partially accurate, represents a generational wound inside Russia, one that is, according to analysts, starting to register publicly. Russia watchers say the war is becoming increasingly unpopular among ordinary Russians. The economy is under sustained pressure. Internet access has been disrupted by government crackdowns, and Ukrainian strikes reaching deeper into Russian territory are provoking anxiety in communities that previously felt insulated from the conflict. There is a dark symmetry in this. Two populations, one that has been living under constant attack for 4 years, and one that is now beginning to feel a distant tremor of what that means. Both exhausted, both uncertain, neither able to see a clean end to it. And then there is the seasonal dimension, one that military planners are watching very carefully right now. Spring is in full bloom across Ukraine and the contested eastern regions. New foliage is filling in, and there is concern, openly voiced by those fighting, that increased vegetation will reduce visibility for Ukrainian drone operators, while simultaneously giving Russian infiltrators more natural cover to move through contested areas undetected. The same season that brings warmth to a population that survived another winter under attack could narrow one of Ukraine's most significant tactical advantages. Ukraine just had its best month in almost 2 years of territorial tracking. But here's what doesn't get said loudly enough. Ukraine has had moments like this before. The 2022 counteroffensive, sweeping through Kharkiv, recapturing Kherson, was genuinely historic. The Kursk incursion in August 2024 was audacious. Neither of those advances ended the war. So the real question now is not whether Ukraine can score tactical victories. It's whether this particular momentum, built on drone logistics strikes, exhausted Russian assault units, and a degraded Russian supply chain, can survive the summer, can survive a potential shift in Western political will, can survive what Russia does next. Because Moscow does not stay still. Step back from the frontline updates. Step back from the daily drone counts and the monthly territorial scorecards. What is actually happening in this war, at the structural level? Ukraine entered 2026 in a precarious position. Western military aid had slowed. Manpower was a genuine concern. Russia had just captured Pokrovsk. The narrative in several Western capitals, including Washington, leaned toward the idea that Kyiv needed to accept an unfavorable negotiated settlement before things got worse. That framing assumed Russian momentum was durable. It wasn't. The Institute for the Study of Wars analysis now shows that Russia suffered a net territorial loss in April, the first such reversal since Ukraine's Kursk incursion 18 months ago. And analysts at ISW have been explicit. This undermines the central pillar of Putin's negotiating strategy, which has always been to convince Western governments that Ukraine cannot win, and that supporting it further is simply prolonging the inevitable. That strategy was never purely military. It was psychological, designed to fracture the coalition behind Ukraine before the battlefield could be decided. And for stretches of this war, it worked. The drone shift changes the equation in a specific way. Russia's military model for this war has relied on grinding human wave pressure, sending waves of infantry forward, absorbing catastrophic losses, but moving the line. That model requires constant resupply, constant reinforcement, a logistics chain that keeps working regardless of conditions. Mid-range Ukrainian drones are attacking that chain directly, not the soldiers at the front, not the politicians in Moscow, the trucks, the depots, the command posts that keep the entire machine fed. If that chain degrades fast enough, and current data suggests it is degrading, Russia's frontline capacity doesn't just slow down, it begins to hollow out from within. But nothing about this war moves cleanly or predictably. Putin gave a public address around Victory Day, May 9th, that, according to analysts, hinted at possible openness toward ending the war. Whether that represents a genuine strategic recalibration or another layer of information warfare aimed at Western audiences is not yet clear. The Kremlin's communication has rarely meant exactly what it appeared to mean. Meanwhile, both sides are pouring resources into drone production at a pace that would have seemed impossible at the start of this war. Ukraine is scaling contracts. Russia is adapting. The front line is now so saturated with aerial surveillance and strike capability that large ground maneuvers are nearly impossible for either side. That creates a strange equilibrium. Neither army can advance decisively, but Ukraine needs far less territory to win than Russia does. Ukraine needs to hold. Russia needs to take. And right now, Russia cannot take. As one analyst put it, Ukraine may not be winning, but it is losing a lot less than Russia. That might sound like a modest conclusion for 4 years of war. It is. But in a conflict where the margins have been this brutal, losing less, sustaining pressure, degrading the opponent's capability, keeping the coalition intact, is exactly how wars at this scale eventually turn. The question hanging over the next 6 months: does Ukraine receive enough support to sustain what it has built? Does the drone production ramp hold? Does the political will in Europe and Washington hold with it? And across the line, does Russia find a way to absorb this pressure? Or does 352,000 dead, a struggling economy, and a military that is reportedly filing false reports upward finally begin to crack something that propaganda has been holding together for 4 years? Neither answer is written yet. This story is not over, not by a long measure. The next few weeks along Ukraine's front lines could either confirm that this momentum is real or reveal it as fragile. The decisions being made right now in Kyiv, Moscow, Washington, and Brussels will shape what this war looks like by the end of 2026. What do you think happens next? Does Ukraine hold this momentum, or does Russia adapt and push back? Leave your analysis in the comments. And if you want to stay ahead of this story as it develops, every new frontline shift, every diplomatic signal, every intelligence development, subscribe. Because this is exactly the kind of story that looks completely different 3 weeks from now.